The first thing the American soldier noticed was the silence. It was April 1945. Germany was collapsing. Cities were falling one by one, and the war that had consumed the world for 6 brutal years was finally gasping for air. But inside a captured industrial complex on the outskirts of Frankfurt, the machines were still warm. The young officer standing there, Captain Robert Clayton, United States Army, had expected ruins. Instead, he found order. Filing cabinets neatly labeled, blueprints rolled and stacked with care, machinery aligned as if production would resume the next morning. That was the moment he understood something terrifying. The war was ending, but American power was just beginning. Clayton was not a frontline hero. He had not stormed beaches or charged machine gun nests. He belonged to a quieter unit, one that operated behind the noise of artillery and headlines. His orders were simple on paper: secure enemy technology, documents, and personnel before the Soviets reached them. What his orders did not say was this: whoever controlled what Germany had built would control the next century. The United States Army already knew the next war would not be fought like the last one. Tanks and infantry had won battles, but science, logistics, psychology, and information would decide empires. And Germany, defeated, bombed, broken, was still the most advanced military-industrial machine on Earth. Within weeks, American convoys began moving across Germany, not with prisoners, but with engineers, not with weapons, but with ideas, not with flags, but with contracts and clearance documents stamped top secret. This was not conquest, it was acquisition. Long before the public heard phrases like Cold War, the U.S. Army had already chosen its side. Not capitalism versus communism, not democracy versus tyranny. The real battle was speed. Speed to extract mines, speed to absorb systems, speed to turn yesterday's enemy into tomorrow's advantage. In Washington, senior Army planners sat in windowless rooms, studying maps that no longer showed battle lines. Instead, they showed factories, laboratories, rail hubs, and universities. Each location was marked not by how hard it was to capture, but by how valuable it would be afterward. The United States had won the war militarily. Now it intended to win history. One of the first realizations was brutally pragmatic. America had manpower, money, and industrial capacity, but Germany had decades of research that could not be recreated quickly. Jet propulsion, guided missiles, chemical synthesis, advanced metallurgy, battlefield medicine, rocketry. Entire disciplines had been pushed forward under wartime desperation. The Army did not want revenge, it wanted results. So, rules were bent, backgrounds were blurred, moral lines were quietly redrawn. A German scientist who had worn a Nazi armband yesterday could be wearing a U.S. Army security badge tomorrow. His past was inconvenient. His knowledge was priceless. Officially, America stood for justice. Unofficially, it stood for survival. Captain Clayton watched trucks roll out of the Frankfurt complex under armed guard, carrying crates marked only with numbers, no insignia, no explanations. The drivers had orders not to ask questions. The destination was not written on any civilian map. Some crates contained blueprints for jet engines that could fly higher and faster than anything in the American arsenal. Others contained medical data gathered from experiments that were ethically horrific and scientifically irreplaceable. Some held missile guidance systems that would soon point not at London, but at the edge of space. Clayton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold spring air. The United States Army was not just collecting trophies, it was rebuilding itself using the bones of its enemy. By summer, the operation had a name, but only on documents stamped with ink so dark it seemed to absorb light. It was called Operation Paperclip. The name sounded harmless, administrative, boring. That was intentional. Paperclips held documents together. This operation held the future together. In military bases across the United States, new arrivals began appearing, men with heavy accents, unfamiliar manners, and eyes that had seen the Reich collapse from the inside. They were housed on Army installations, guarded by American soldiers, paid by American money. Their Nazi pasts were sanitized, records rewritten, party memberships quietly removed from files. The Army was not interested in who these men had been, only in what they could build next. Jet aircraft programs leapt forward by years. Missile testing in the deserts of New Mexico accelerated at a pace that shocked even senior generals. Army doctors suddenly had access to data that redefined human endurance, trauma treatment, and aerospace medicine. None of this was public. The American people believed the war was over. The Army knew better. Across the Atlantic, a new adversary was rising, one with millions of soldiers, endless territory, and an ideology that rejected American influence. The Soviet Union had lost more men than any other nation in the war, and it was determined never to be vulnerable again. The race was no longer for Berlin, it was for tomorrow, and the United States Army intended to get there first. By 1947, American military doctrine had begun to change in ways few civilians noticed. The focus shifted from mass infantry warfare to mobility, air superiority, intelligence dominance, and rapid technological adaptation. War colleges quietly rewrote curricula, command structures were reorganized, new branches and research divisions appeared almost overnight. This was not accidental evolution, it was deliberate design. The Army had learned a dangerous lesson from World War II. Morality didn't stop bullets, and principles didn't build rockets. Power did, and power came from knowledge. Captain Clayton, now promoted and reassigned, found himself stationed at a desert proving ground where missiles screamed into the sky instead of shells across fields. He watched German engineers argue with American officers over equations that would decide how far humanity could reach beyond Earth. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered what price had been paid for this progress, not in dollars, in souls. But the Army did not encourage such thoughts. Officers were trained to think in outcomes, not regrets. The future was too important to be burdened by the past. By the time the Cold War officially entered public vocabulary, the United States Army was already years ahead. It had absorbed not only technology, but methods, how Germany organized research, integrated industry with military planning, and mobilized science for national survival. America did it bigger, faster, richer, and with a smile. The irony was sharp enough to cut steel. The very systems designed to defeat American forces in World War II had become the foundation of American military dominance in the second half of the 20th century. The enemy had lost. Its ideas had won. As the Korean War erupted, then Vietnam, then countless proxy conflicts around the globe, the shadow of those quiet post-1945 decisions stretched long and dark. Every helicopter blade, every guided missile, every high-altitude reconnaissance flight carried echoes of a moment when the Army chose pragmatism over purity. History books would later argue whether it was right or wrong. The Army never debated that question. It only measured effectiveness, and effectiveness was absolute. By the end of the century, the United States military stood unmatched, global, technological, omnipresent. Bases on every continent, satellites in orbit, weapons that could strike anywhere on Earth within minutes. All of it traced back to that silent factory floor in 1945, where a young officer realized that victory was not about defeating enemies, it was about